Hello, guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're going to be doing another episode of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we're doing part 138. So we've got a very interesting assortment of animals. We've got a couple of reptiles, a couple of amphibians, and a few extinct animals. I know how much everyone loves their extinct animals, so I'm quite excited to get stuck into this one. So first up, we've got a mod done by Leaf and Jen. We have got the Hellbender. So this is one I'm really excited to have a look at. So these are a little small, but we will talk about them soon enough. So let's have a look. See if we can find one that's swimming in the light. This one right there. Little Hellbenders are so cute. Let's see. Well, there we are. Have a look at you. So this is a Hellbender. So these guys are also known as just the Hellbender salamander. They are a species of giant salamander endemic to the United States. So they're a close relative to the Japanese and giant Chinese salamanders, those kind of species. Really, really cool. So the name Hellbender, we don't know where it came from, but it's believed to be because of the animal's odd look. It looks like a hellbender's creature. It looked like hell when it was bent on returning, so that's kind of where its name pretty much came from. Though there have been other names for it called snot otters, lasagna lizards, devil dog, mud devil, mud dog, water dog, grampus, alligator, and Lavernon water newt. So there are a lot of very interesting names. I personally very much like snot otter. I think that's a very great name for these guys and fits them quite well. So the species is called Cryptobranchus allergenus, and there's two different subspecies as it went into. So you can see they've got quite a large body and a flat head. I'm gonna actually look at another one. Yeah, there we are. I'll look at you. Large body with a flat head, with beady dorsal eyes and quite slimy skin. And like most salamanders, they do have 4 toes on their front legs and 5 on the back, with a tail that's keeled for propulsion. Their tail is shaped like the rudder, but it's really only used for swimming, as they use their padded toes to rip onto rocks and walk up down streams instead of swimming. And they do have working lungs, but gill slits are often retained, and often only immature specimens have gills. And they typically absorb oxygen through their frills with the gills. And only occasionally leaving the water, they make little use of these lungs, and the juveniles lose their external goods at about 8 months old. And they use their lungs for buoyancy more than breathing, so they typically don't really need to breathe as they get in a lot of their stuff through their skin. And you can see they've got a botchy brown and red-brown colour. So very, very cool animals. So typically both male and adult females grow from about 24 to 40 centimeters, or about 19 to 15 inches from snout to vent, with a total length of about 30 to 74 centimeters, or about 12 to 29 inches, making it the 4th largest salamander species in the world, just behind the few different species like the South China giant salamander, the Chinese salamander, and the Japanese giant salamander. And is actually the largest amphibian in North America, even though its length is rivaled by the reticulated siren in the southern United States, even though it's much leaner. So it is the biggest amphibian of the US, though this game puts a little too small, but still huge animals. It also weighs between 1.5 to 2.5 kilograms, or 3.3 to 5.5 pounds, making it the 5th heaviest amphibian in the world after their cousins, the Goliath frog, and some of the largest cane toads that can weigh as much as a hellbender. And they typically reach sexual maturity at about 5 years of age and may live up to 30 years in captivity. So the way you can tell them apart from other salamanders, like gill slits, and obviously their large size. Also, they don't really overlap except with other mud puppies, but different species along. And the average size is typically a little bit smaller for the northern subspecies and southern subspecies, I believe. So they're definitely bigger than even the biggest mud puppies, so you can tell that. So they typically only contain one species, as I mentioned, but there are different subspecies. Recent populations have been looking into for their conservation, and there seems to be 3 distinct genetic units. Not all of them are described as subspecies, but they're kind of lumped into their 2 subspecies. So it seems that these guys have been in these 3 unique groups. In terms of their habitats or distribution, they can be found in a number of states in the eastern US, from southern New York to northern Georgia. That includes places like Ohio, Maryland, West Virginia, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Missouri, and extending into Kansas and Oklahoma, which is pretty cool. And some populations actually been historically been known quite abundant, but have declined up to 70% since the 1980s. So they are endangered in some areas. That's why they're listed as vulnerable. So in terms of their ecology, these guys are considered habitat specialists. So they're able to fill a specific niche within a specific environment. So they require a lot of consistently of dissolved oxygen, temperature, and flow from saltwater areas, so they can live in a very narrow spectrum of rivers. As a result, the specialization they can be found in areas with large, irregularly shaped or intermittent rocks, or swiftly moving water, as they tend to avoid wider, slow-moving waters with muddy banks. So they prefer like mountain rivers, pretty much. And this specialization has likely contributed to their populations, as collectors trying to collect them could easily find their habitats and collect them. And yeah, it's a little bit sad. But typically, their average home range is about 198 square meters, and you typically never find two individuals on the same rock. But yeah. So both subspecies typically will go through a metamorphosis at about a year and a half in their life. At this point, they'll when they're roughly about 13 centimeters or about 5 inches long. What they'll do is they'll lose their gills during the larval stage, and until then, they can be easily confused as mud puppies. But after this metamorphosis, they absorb oxygen through default in their skin, which is really needed because of the fast-moving oxygenated water. That's why they need it. And then the hellbender ends up in areas of slow-moving water. Not enough oxygen will pass over their skin, and then they'll die. But they do get preyed upon by quite a few different species, such as snakes and turtles, fish and reptiles as well. And cannibalism on their eggs can be a common occurrence. So in terms of their behavior, they tend to be almost like little crocodiles. They tend to hang around their favorite location. They'll only leave to either breed or to hunt, and they'll protect it from other hellbenders both in and out of the breeding season. When their ranges overlap, they are noted to really be present in the overlapping area with other things. They seem to also be nocturnal, with peak of activity happening 2 hours before dark and again at dawn. And nocturnal activity has been seen most prevalent in early summer, most likely with the high depths of water. So in terms of their diet, these guys feed primarily on crayfish and small fish, but have been known to eat insects, worms, mollusks, tadpoles, and smaller salamanders. And also lots of evidence suggests they would eat newts, and they seem to have also noted that more crayfish predation in the summer was higher prey activity. So there seem to be some different populations or different times of year they'll eat more things like, as I mentioned, the nymphs and things like that. But also, and larvae would eat those too, but adults tend to eat probably more fish. Makes up a larger part of their winter diet. They eat more crayfish in the summer, just depends. And also eat the eggs as well. So their breeding season typically begins around late August to early to mid-September, and then continue as late as the end of November, depending on the region. They don't have very much sexual dimorphism, except during the fall mating season, as the male will have a bulging ring around his cloacal gland. And unlike most salamanders, they perform external fertilization. So each male will excavate a brood site, which is a source of impression under a rock or a log, and then the male returns to the site and waited for the female. When the female approaches, the male will guide and dives her into the burrow, and then prevents her from leaving until she lays her eggs, and then he'll incubate them. Fertilize them. And female hellbenders typically lay between 150 to 200 eggs over a 2 to 3 day period. The eggs are about 18 to 20 millimeters in diameter, by 5 or 10 cords. And as the female lays eggs, the male will position himself above them and spray the eggs with a sperm, fertilizing them. And they can often tempt many other females to lay eggs in his nest, as many as like just under 2,000. So some really lucky males, get a lot of females in there, have been found in a single nest. And males also exhibit mate and shelter guarding. So studies have shown that until the female sexually reproduces, the male hellbender will guard her and his territory until the reproduction is complete. But cannibalism, it leads to be much lower eggs in hellbenders and prevents them as well. So in terms of oviposition, so after the eggs are laid, the male is drives the female away, and then guards the nest. That includes incubating males who also rock back and forth and undulate their lateral folds to circulate the water. So male hellbenders are very good dads, which increases the oxygen supply for both the eggs and the adult. And incubation will last about 45 to 75 days, depending on the region. And hatchlings are typically between 23 and 33 millimeters, or about 0.9 to 1.3 inches, and have a yolk sac, which is their first source of energy for the first few months, and they lack limbs. So in terms of, as I mentioned, they've got all sorts of different adaptations. They do have bad eyesight. They also can have a secretion that is important for their immunity against citrid fungus, so they're quite resilient to that. They also have a lateral line similar to fish that allows them to detect vibrations in the water. And these long wrinkle and folds, as I mentioned, is also really helpful for them to detect, to grab oxygen. The lateral line helps with movement, so they don't rely so much on sight. So that's really, really cool. Though sadly, we're going to talk about their conservation status. So, research throughout the range has shown some drastic declines, and as of 2022, they're considered vulnerable. So, there's many factors that have gone into the decline. So, things like siltation and sedimentation in rivers that they like to live in, blocking of migration routes, and destruction of their habitats created by dams as developments, but also pollution, overharvesting, disease, and all that have all had detrimental impacts on populations. Though luckily, there have been some effort to try and help them. So also reintroductions. There's been argument for reintroductions, and they're all listed as endangered species. There are zoos helping to breed them in captivity, and releasing them into the wild as well. So there's lots of conservation efforts. Some areas they have depleted really gone a lot. So it's the Osbuck Hellbender was listed as endangered species, and the Hellbender of White River system kind of really declined with only about 600 or so individuals living in the wild. But then the pet trade was thought to be the pet trade, and declining water quality was thought to be a big reason why they went extinct. But luckily, some zoos, like the St. Louis Zoo's population, helped wild populations, and now they've been bred in captivity, and now they're trying to help them. But as I mentioned, big threats, as I mentioned, all of those, but also chytrid fungus. So that's something that's affecting a lot of salamanders around the world. Although it's not confirmed in the Americas, it could be a risk. So it could be very severe if that fungus got into America. So that's why good biosecurity is important. But yeah, a species with a lot of problems, but luckily they are doing okay and definitely worth conserving because they're definitely cool little guys. Definitely love amphibians. They deserve more love. But yeah, I love the Hellbender. So that was done by Leaf and Jen. Next one was done by Leaf, Jen, and Scott. So we've got here the Leopard Gecko. So I'm sure most of you guys will be familiar with this guy. So little Leopard Gecko, hiding in the little corner there. See if you can find one in the sun. Well, you're kind of half in the sun. There we are. Look at this little guy. So this is the Leopard Gecko, or just called the common Leopard Gecko. So they're a ground-dwelling gecko native to the rocky dry grasslands and desert regions of Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, India, and Nepal, and a popular pet. There's all sorts of different morphs, and there's lots of extensive captive breeding, so pretty easy to get one, but they're not domesticated. Even though some people refer them as the domesticated, there's no evidence of domesticated lizards. So in terms of the native habitat, they tend to live around rocky, dry grasslands, as I mentioned, around South Asian places, Nepal and Iran. They inhabit arid to semi-arid habitats with sparse vegetation or clay or sandy soils, as well as rocky habitats. And they tend to avoid areas where their primary substrate is sand. And they also may be found in arid areas in Nepal and Pakistan, but typically shelter under loose bark and trees in these environments. Winter temperatures within the range of the leopard gecko can be quite low, between 10 degrees or about 50 degrees Celsius, forcing them to go into brumation and live off fat reserves. So in terms of the ecology, they're generally considered to be nocturnal, and during the day they typically retreat into their burrows and hiding spots and become active at dawn when temperatures are favourable. And like most geckos, they are nocturnal, but they manage to get all the heat from their rocks, which is something I'm not sure that's true or not. And there's a lot of people saying that, but I'm not sure that's actually true. Though typically they should be getting, especially in captivity as well, UVB and exposure, which is it should just be a given, I think. But even though melatonin helps them sleep in captivity, so for us it wakes them up, helps us sleep, them it wakes them up, so it has the opposite effect. So UVB, if you have captive leopard geckos, you should be providing the UVB. They can live without it, but they should probably be getting it. But there's been some contradicting about that. But typically, they will bask and they will like that UVB. So make sure to give them. And there's a debate how they interact with other geckos and things like that. And claims that they're solitary. They usually don't live with other animals, but some people do house them together. In terms of their diet, they are opportunistic predators. They'll feed on anything they can get their mouths around. So invertebrates are presumed to make up the majority of their wild diet, though they will take small prey like mouse pups, smaller reptiles, and even hatchling leopard geckos potentially. And breeders report they significantly fed, they won't cannibalize their young, but that behavior can only be found in poorly bred animals or poorly fed animals. In terms of characteristics, they are small lizards, and they get their name, leopard gecko, from the spots they look like a leopard. Hatchlings are about 7 to 10 centimeters, or about 2.8 to 3.9 inches in length, and weigh about 2 to 5 grams. Adult females are about 18 to 20 centimeters, or about 7 to 7.1 to 7.9 inches in length, weigh about 50 to 70 grams. Adult males are about 20 to 28 centimeters, or about 7 to 11 inches, and weigh about 60 to 80 grams. And unlike other species, they do not have the same kind of lamellae that geckos have that allow them to climb off walls, so they're not very good at climbing up walls. They can't do that. They're also called polyphyodonts, which means they could replace their 100 teeth every 2 to 3 to 4 months. And next to the full-grown tooth, there's a small replacement tooth, which is quite interesting. And their tails are distinctively thick, because that's where they store their food. So very much like a camel's hump, they have lots of fatty tissues in their tail that allow them for nourishment. And when hunting, they may lift their tail in a twitching or wagging motion as it approaches a predator, then eats its prey, then it kind of grabs and eats it. And they also have a thing called caudal autonomy, so that means they're able to break off their tail and kind of run away, and they can kind of regenerate it, but it appears stubby and never has the same appearance as the original tail. So as I mentioned, they can get rid of their tail. It's called caudal autonomy, but also they use camouflage. You also remain hidden, avoid the heat and the risk of being spotted by large predators, so they tend to come out at night, and with the tail as well. And they also come in all sorts of different colors, as kind of chromatophores. So these are the kind of chromatophores that you can see in pretty much all animals, from like amphibians, reptiles, and some species of insects. They are responsible for their colors, and there's been lots of artificial selection in captivity to breed all sorts of different cool morphs and things like that. And in terms of sexual dimorphism, there's not really too much of a difference between males and females. Typically, it can be quite different, hard to tell. But males typically have pre-anal pores and hemipenal bulges as a way to tell them apart. But also pheromones, also size, another big thing. But and then we're going to talk about reproduction. So leopard geckos will typically breed during the summer. Females can store sperm over the course of their breeding season, and can have up to 2 to 3 clutches from 1 or 2 copulations. And females can lay up to 6 to 8 eggs and clutches of 2 eggs. And eggs are approximately laid about 21 to 28 days after mating. And they average about time from the newborn to hatch is about 35 to 89 days, where it's usually closer to the latter, so typically about 70 to 80 days. They also have an egg tooth, which is a little tip on that's calcium on the end of their snout. They use it to break the egg, and it typically falls off right after. And then they'll shed their skin within the first 24 hours of hatching, and they will not be able to eat until their first shedding. And also they've been known to use temperature determinant sex determination. So embryos that are predominantly cool will develop or very warm temperatures, so between 26 to 29 degrees, or about 30 to 35 degrees. So really extremes will develop into females, while their intermediates, so between 31 and 33 degrees, will develop into males. So if it's extremes, it's females. If it's optimum, it's males. So that means the males, because they're bigger, they get a little bit of a better chance. And females are typically born in high temperatures, differ from those who are born in lower temperatures that tend to be more aggressive, or known as hot females. But they're often deemed to be infertile, so like a little bit cooler. And they're one of the most common pets of lizards. They're actually second only to the Komodo dragon. And they're typically sold. They're pretty extensive, and they come in all sorts of range of colors, though they can be found like wild colors. But there's all sorts of different colors. There's lots of variations in different morphs and stuff that people have bred from leopard geckos. But yeah, really, really cool. All these cute little guys. Definitely a big fan. So that's leopard geckos. That was done by Leif, Jen, and Scott. So all did a wonderful job with that one. So next up, we have got the red-eared slider, another really nice one. So this was done by Leif and Nick, Nicholas Lyon Ryder. So we'll have a look at these little guys here, obviously based on the diamondback terrapin. So let's see if you can find a... There we are, look at you, little friend. Little friend, I love these guys. So red-eared sliders, or the red-eared terrapin. They're a type of pond slider in the subaquatic turtle family Amymonidae, and are the most popular pet turtle in the United States, and also quite popular around the world. Even in New Zealand, we get lots of those with leopard geckos. And I consider the most invasive turtle species in the world, as we'll get into. So the red-eared slider gets its name from that small stripe on the neck there. We said the red ears. And there's believed to be... there's about 250 species of turtles. There's some different subspecies like the red-eared slider, the Cumberland slider, and the yellow-bellied slider. But in terms of size, the carapace of the species can reach about 40 centimeters or about 16 inches in length, and typically will range about 15 to 20 centimeters, 6 to 8 inches. The females in the species are usually larger than the males, with so the females are typically bigger. They will also live between 20 to 30 years, although some individuals have been known to live well into their 70s. And their life expectancy is shorter when they're also kept in captivity, which is interesting, because often the quality of the environment has a strong influence on their well-being. So a lot of people keeping them probably don't keep them right. And also since they live so long, a lot of people just abandon them. That's why they're so invasive. So very similar, they've got the very typical turtle look. They've got the carapace at the top there, and they've also got the plastron at the bottom there. And they got the scoots, and they have partially webbed feet to help them swim, but they've also got claws that allow them to dig and run around and do things, which is interesting. And the color and vibrance of them can actually indicate immune health, so it shows that they're really healthy. So bright red individuals have healthier immune systems than yellow striped ones. Which is quite interesting. And they are considered polyothermic, as their temperatures depending on the environment, or they're cold-blooded, and they need to sunbathe regularly to maintain their body temperature. So there is some dimorphism that exists between males and females. They practically look identical, but typically the adults is much easier to identify. So males will have longer claws on their front feet for females. As they use the courtship, they typically kind of like slap the female's face a little bit to kind of get her in the mood. And the male's tails are also thicker and longer, and the opening of the female is usually on the rear of the carapace, since they've got to allow for the hemipenes. And older males tend to be a dark greyish olive colour, with more subdued markings, and the female appearance pretty much stays the same throughout her lifetime. So in terms of the habitat, the species itself originated from the Missouri River or Mississippi River up into the Gulf of Mexico and warm climates of the southeastern United States. So they can be found around Colorado, Virginia, and Florida, where they live in all sorts of habitats like ponds, lakes, streams, and slow-flowing creeks, things like that, where they like to live in calm water, but they're able to leave the water easily by running on rocks and things, so they can warm up on the sun. Individuals often found sunbathing can be together, and they also like abundant aquatic plants, as this is what the adults eat. And although they are omnivores, and turtles in the wild remain close to the water unless they're searching for habitats or females are really wanting to go out and lay eggs. So as I mentioned as well, they are invasive. So they've been can be quite negative to ecosystems they've been introduced in because of their high reproductive rates, size as well, but also can transmit diseases to local species. Can be very bad. And that includes feral populations have been recorded in Bermuda, Canada, Australia, Great Britain, South Africa, Israel, Guam, Russia, and Far East Asia. So they are quite invasive. They are considered one of the 100 most invasive species in the world. That's quite bad. And they're almost entirely aquatic, as I mentioned, but they need to come out to sunbathe. They will brumate, so typically during cooler winters, with temperatures, especially like October, where the temperatures reach below 10 degrees, they will go into brumation. And in terms of reproduction, courting will typically occur between May and July, where that takes place underwater. And during courtship, the male will swim around to the female and flutters or vibrates his long claws, as I mentioned, then direct females towards pheromones towards her. And then they'll mate, last for about 45 minutes, the courtship, yeah. And then on occasion, the male may appear to be courting another male, and when we're kept in captivity, they could be homosexual, of course. After mating, though, the female will spend extra time basking to keep her eggs warm, and she may actually have a change of diet, eating like a lot more protein-rich foods. A female can lay between 2 to 30 eggs, depending on her body size and other factors. Other females can lay, one female can lay up to 5 clutch years in the same year, and clutches are usually separated between 12 to 36 days apart. So the timing of mating between egg laying can be days or weeks, and fertilization can happen with conjunction with eggs immediately laid based on location and nutrition, and the actual egg fertilization takes place during the egg laying, which is quite interesting. So incubation for these guys takes about 59 to 112 days, with late season hatchlings may spend the winter in the nest and emerge out when water weather in spring. And just prior to hatching, they can do the egg will contain 50% turtle, 50% egg sac, and then they'll use the egg tooth to break out and then go out there. And they may stay inside their shells after hatching for like a day or two, and then kind of hang around and then kind of go out and look at it. And the yolk sac will provide nutrients for a few days, so they'll be fine. And typically, the time between egg hatching and water entry is about 21 days, so that's when they kind of learn. Also, as well, they Also, temperature sex determinants. So typically, males are produced when the temperature is cooler, between 22 and 27 degrees, or about 71 to 81 degrees Fahrenheit, where females are warmer, and colder temperatures will be the death of the embryos and things like that. So as I mentioned, they're one of the world's most commonly traded reptiles. They can be a big risk for salmonella, other diseases going to native turtles and invasive species in India and Australia, which is not a good thing. But yeah, still a really cool animal. They're fine. I love these little guys. Great pets, but they shouldn't be out in the wild other than in southern US, so southeastern US. So they shouldn't be out in Australia and things like that. Great pets though. I had a mate that had one as a baby, and I've been considering getting one again, but I have to have it outside. But yeah, really, really cool animal. Love these little turtles. They're actually really cheap, but yeah, still cool animals. Love them. So that was done by Leaf and Nick, and the next one's done by Leaf and Nick as well. We have got a mammal, so we've got the grey-headed flying fox. So let's have a look at these guys. So there's one sitting there. Let's see if we can find one a little bit more of a interesting position. There we are. Look at these cute little guys. Let's see if we can get another one. Wait, no. They're all hanging down. Oh, here's one. It's having a drink. Probably not in the right angle, but that's alright. We'll have a look at these guys. So the grey-headed flying fox is a megabat native to Australia and is the largest flying fox in Australia, the largest native bat. So in terms of description, as I mentioned, they are the largest bat in Australia. They have a wingspan reaching about a metre in length and weigh about a kilogram. So weights generally vary between 600 to 1,000 grams, with an average about 700 grams, or about 21 to 35 ounces, with an average about 25 ounces. And the combined length of head to body is about 230 to 290 millimeters, and the forearm length can be between 138 to 180 millimeters, which is quite cool. So they don't have a very, very distinct coat. Other than that, they've got like a dark grey coat with a light green head, separated by a reddish collar, and the fur on their body is quite long and streaked and grey. And one characteristic that's really weird for them and not another among bats of their genus is they've got fur on their legs that extend all the way to their ankles. And like many other species of big bats, they lack a tail, and all these bats will present claws on their first digit, and they have like that head that looks very dog or fox-like as they feed on things like that, since they don't echolocate. But they do use lots of clicks and sounds and squeals to communicate. And they're actually quite long-lived for a mammal, which is interesting. They can live up to 23 years of captivity, with up to 15 years in the wild. So in terms of distribution, they can be found in the eastern regions of Australia, mostly within 200 kilometres of the coast, from Queensland down into Melbourne, and they've been seen up in Queensland. But typically, urbanisation has displaced the species, and it can be a big issue, obviously, habitat displacement. So in terms of habitat, they live in a variety of habitats like woodlands, rainforests, and swamps, and they can vary in size depending on locations. But during the day, they usually live in quite large roosts or colonies or camps that can have hundreds to tens of thousands of individuals. Colonies will be formed in arbitrary locations, typically around rainforest patches where there's plenty of roosting area, things like that. And movements can be tracked pretty much by the availability of food, and their population is very fluid, and they move in response to different plants blossoming and things like that. It's quite irregular. And they're keystone pollinators. They're quite important to the ecosystem, so they pollinate over 100 species of native plants and trees, and they are partial migration to kind of help that as well. Although small numbers they've been seen to visit Melbourne, but they most likely will be spreading down because of climate change. They are spreading down like to Adelaide and things like that, so that's quite interesting. So in terms of their diet and foraging, we'll have a look at another one over here. Well, that one's a nice little posse, so we'll have a look at you, little cutie. So this guy is a cutie. Anyway, around dusk, they'll typically head out and leave their roost to find nectar, pollen, and fruit, and they be known to consume the fruit, flowers, and pollen of about 187 different species of plants, including eucalypts and all sorts of fruits and things like that, like figs. And they're considered sequential specialists, since they eat a variety of food, and they are, along with three other bat species, flying fox species, they're quite important for dispersing lots of pollen and seeds around Australia, which is quite interesting. There's another guy there, so let's see if we can find another one. Kind of hard to spot you when you're flying. Yeah, a little bit weird when you're flying. A little hiding in the corner, what a cutie. I'll have a look at you. Stuff for one up. Alright, so interesting as well, they are the only mammalian Nectivore or frugivore that occupy some substantial parts of subtropical rainforest, so they're quite very important for their forest. The teeth and palate of these bats is able to extract plant juices from food, and they also only swallow smaller seeds. Incisors can hold these fruit, and they're able to suck them out with using their teeth and tongue, which is quite interesting. And there's a little bit of also attracted to the sense of flowers and bloom, so that's how they usually track. And they actually also enjoy like you see the different colors as well, which is quite cool. So most of the trees that they do feed from will actually produce nectar and pollen seasonally, and it's quite unpredictable. So they typically will move with their migrations. They'll move from their roosts and feed depending on what time of year it is and what plants are available. So it's quite interesting as well. And with males, so the entire colony may actually leave later when a predatory bird is present, while lactating females will leave earlier. With males, the bachelors actually leave earlier than the harem holding males and guard and wait until the females have all left. And the flying foxes also leave the roost earlier, more vulnerable to predation. And some flying foxes will wait for others to leave, which is called the after you effect. So, let them go out to danger first. Someone's got to go first. So in terms of social organization, they do have two types of roosting camps. They have summer and winter camps. So summer ones are usually between September to April and June, and these camps, these guys will establish territories, mates, and reproduce. But during the winter, it's April to September, where their sexes are separated, and they'll often groom, but they don't really breed and reproduce in that time. In the summer camps, typically from January, the males will set up mating territories, and typically will have their neck glands enlarged, and they use them to mark territories. They will fight to maintain these territories, and there'll be a steep drop in the male's condition as he protects his territory. And about the beginning of the mating season, adult females will move from the periphery of the central male territories, and there'll be a harem. Males will have a harem, about 4 to 5 females, and then kind of go off and do their thing. So it's best described as a lek. So typically it's the males will have a territory in display, and then the females will choose who they want to mate with. And typically, in terms of reproduction for these guys, mating is generally observed between March and May, but most likely the time of conception is April. Most matings will take place in territories during the day, and females will have control of the copulation, while the male may have to keep mating with the same female. Females usually give birth to one young each year, and gestation lasts about 27 weeks, and pregnant females give birth about late September, November, and late births in January, although have been observed. So they're quite artificial. So they need to rely on their mother for warmth, and in the first 3 weeks, the young will cling to their mother's belly while they go out feeding, and after this, the young will remain in the roost, and by January, the young are capable of flying, and by February, March, and April, they are fully weaned and off going on their own. So in terms of predation, they are preyed upon by eagles, goannas, and snakes. There have been things like sea eagles that have been able to capture these guys, and some snake species will actually be found roosting in their camps, lazily selecting an individual to grab and seize them in their jaws and eat them up, which is quite interesting. So in terms of conservation, they are considered, I believe, vulnerable. Yeah, they are considered vulnerable. So they are at some risk of extinction. So they're now a prominent federal conservation projects as the numbers have declined. So they're believed the estimate of their population is just about under 600,000, with the natural population declining over 30%. So there's lots of threats, including loss of rainforest habitat, both for roosting and for foraging, competition with black flying foxes, die-offs of when urban environments and extreme temperature or weather events. Also, orchards, they often will be considered a nuisance to farmers that farm fruit, since they'll go and raid orchards, and obviously they'll kill them. They're also a big vector for disease, such as the Australian bat virus and melange virus, which are quite bad things for these guys. And also urbanization is another big issue, but luckily they are mostly considered protected, so they are considered vulnerable to extinction. They are protected under Australian law, and there are people that do rescue them, so lots of people will take care of them. The wildlife hospital, at the bat hospital, often will take in and help rear orphans, so luckily they are given a good fighting chance. Really want to give them a good chance of survival. So really, really awesome. That one's done by Leaf and Nick. Nice to talk about some cool bats. Really interesting that we've got so many cool exhibit animals in this episode. But now we're going back in time. So we're going to the Miocene. We're going to late Miocene. So we've got here by Great Cake Mods, we have got Ekros, which is a very interesting animal. So let's have a look at these guys. So this is, let's see if we can find one walking around that's not We'll have oh, we'll have a look at you. So this is Ekros. So Ecorus ekarakan, I believe you say that. So they're extinct species of large mustelids. So they're related to otters, wolverines, honey badgers, things like that, and are known from relatively complete skeletons and are known from the late Miocene of Kenya. So they were much bigger than any living species of mustelid. Up there with some of the bigger ones. Not the biggest, but there were one of the bigger ones. So they reached about 44 kilograms, which is comparable in size to a wolf, and are much bigger than modern honey badgers, and stand about 60 centimeters tall at the shoulder, about 2 feet tall at the shoulder. Their build was not very similar at all to modern, quite stout mustelids. That have short legs that are well adapted for running, and living large mustelids are either like aquatic predators or terrestrial animals with the crouching stuff like wolverine and badgers and things like that. Ekros is kind of an extinct ecology or an extinct version of like a fast running predatory mustelid. So these guys are kind of like a wolf. So they have long legs and are well adapted for stalking and running, very much like dogs, cats, hyenas, and amphicyonids, which are bear dogs. So the legs are also built like those of a leopard, so they'd be more well adapted for running and chasing things. Much more better adapted for that than modern badgers and things like that. So they kind of took that niche of the kind of mid-sized predator, potentially doing some climbing and a lot of chasing, which is quite cool. So analysis of the elbows suggests it was a strong runner like modern hyenas and dogs, and did not grapple with their paws as bears and raccoon do. So yeah, they wouldn't be good climbers, but they'd be very much pursuit predators like dogs, African wild dogs, and things like that today. So much more different ecology. So basically, a Wolverine trying to be a dhole or trying to be an African wild dog. That's the best way I can compare it. And fossil these guys actually with similar for morphology have been found in North America, Europe, Asia, and as well as other parts of Africa. So it seems around this time there were a lot of mustelids of this kind of ecology. There's like the cat gap in America. So this was kind of before cats and dogs really became a thing. There was mustelids got their chance to kind of become those top predators, which is quite interesting. So in terms of their paleoecology, these guys would have lived with animals such as the three-toed horse, Egigantippus, and the large pig Nionzacurus in forests and woodlands. And in the early Cenozoic, they would have been isolated from Eurasia and Africa, where most groups of cats and giraffes evolved, where you consider most African groups actually evolved in Eurasia. So these guys would have been developing on their own, doing their own thing in Africa when it was isolated. And these guys would have been developed along the lines of humid and close environments. And these guys would have been upstand hunters with lacking desert digging adaptations and were leopard size with leopard-like proportions. And these guys are most likely ambush hunters or also crustacean chasing down prey like modern wolves or hyenas. So played that kind of role in the ecosystem, which is quite interesting. But in general, Miocene predators show large body sizes with dog-like or cat-like sauropods grappling strategies, and this suggests it was still quite abundant in Africa. And before cats and dogs got into got into Africa, these guys were kind of the big predators because cats didn't really get. Dogs evolved in North America and only really left a little while ago. And cats, I'm not actually sure where cats came from. I think they came from. I don't think they came from North America. I think they came from Eurasia. Yeah, don't quote me on that, but I think that's right. But yeah, dogs came from North America, and they really only left at like the end of the Miocene. So that's while Africa was isolated from Eurasia and North America, these guys were those top predators. So these guys were first recorded around the early Miocene in North Africa, and the tectonic changes around 35 million years ago actually led to the formation of the Great Rift Valley, and then caused rift shadows and things like that. And then before the rift opened, Kenya was much more forested, and once the grasslands kind of spread out in Africa, along with the arrival of cats and dogs into Africa, they would have kind of gone extinct and led to the replacement of Ekros and large mustelid hunters by things like felids, hyenas, and canids. So very interesting. It shows a little bit about biogeography and shows that how diverse even animals today. We think of badgers and otters as being very specialized. It shows that there's much more variety back in prehistory, which is always really interesting to learn about. And have a look at the cute little babies. Look at these cute little babies. Almost like little puppies. Little cubs. They're very, very cute. I do think so myself. So look at these little guys. Adorable. Little adorbs. Little men's. Really, really cute. So they eat, and also got the melanistic variation. But anyway, I'm going to carry on. I actually think... Did I actually leave that on? No, they should be right. Okay, yeah. Okay. So now we're going to move on. So that was done by Great Cake Mods. Next one is done by Narwhal. We have got the giant swan. So this is Cygnus falconeri. So these are an extinct species of swan that lived in Malta and Sicily, that lived around the Middle Pleistocene. So the first described, I'll get into it. So they were first described in their own genus Paleocygnus. Then in 2016 they were recharacterized and put into the genus Cygnus, which is quite interesting. So these guys would have been taller, but not heavier than they would have been. So what happened in history? I've covered the dwarf one, or Cygnus altorum, I believe you say that. So there was dwarf swan, and then you have these large giant swans, or sea falconry. So typically about 5 million years ago, so there was a strait between Sicily and Malta, and so that would be connected occasionally. And then sea falconry about 900,000 to 500,000 years ago would have lived on Malta and lived with all sorts of really interesting animals like the dwarf elephants, giant owls, giant cranes, large lizards, otters, many different species of otters, giant tortoises, giant dormice, also small hippos, things like that. And they were descended from whooper crane swan-like ancestors. So there's the whooper crane, or the whooper swan, and they would have. So what happened is they would have come to the island different times, and two different populations would have become the dwarf swan and the giant falconry swan. So it seems these guys didn't really interbreed, but it could have been possible. But they both evolved from a whooper swan-like ancestor, and one got really small, or one got small, and this guy got big. So these guys actually are really huge. So they have a wings estimated to be have a length of about 190 to 210 centimeters long, or about 145 to 160 centimeters tall, I believe. Wingspan of 3 meters and weight about 16 kilograms. So huge compared to modern swans, which is quite interesting. So they would have lived with Paleoxodon falconeri, all sorts of really cool animals. They show some adaptations. They would have resembled a lot the whooper swan, and some have been looking into their anatomy. So these guys would have been big. So they typically had shorter toes and would actually been less well adapted for swimming. So they would have been one of the largest terrestrial herbivores. So they were basically a swan turning into a giraffe, or like a okapi, or like a deer being a large browser in the ecology of Sicily and Malta. So these guys were likely grazers and could reach heights actually taller than the tortoises and the elephants that it was living with. So it kind of had its niche of its own. It was like the giraffe of its area, which is really, really interesting. You think that the largest, tallest herbivore is a swan and not an elephant or a giraffe, which is really, really interesting. So reached higher than them, so much taller than them, which makes it so weird. You think of Malta being like a place of when swans were taller than elephants. It's just really interesting. And then you think about how aggressive these guys would have been. You could see them scaring. There's lots of paleo art of these guys scaring off elephants and things like that, which is really, really funny, but also like really, really interesting. See, as I mentioned, analysis showed that these guys were most likely adapted for walking, but pretty much lost their ability to fly. And these guys would have been kind of a big herbivore in their ecology. And it seems these guys, due to the many large herbivores, these guys kind of got bigger because of that, and then needing to be bigger to compete. They kind of lost the ability to fly, they lost their ability to swim, and became much more terrestrial herbivores, and also had no large predators. And then, sadly, they actually went extinct before humans arrived in Sicily, Malta, because of climate fluctuations and potentially competition with introduced predators. Yeah, really, really cool animal. Definitely cool talking about. Huge, huge animals. So they were the largest swan ever. And if you look at pictures, so yeah, size is like bill to tail, about 190 to 210 centimeters long, based on the whooper swan, which is about 145 to 160 centimeters. So like definitely like a foot longer, and weighed about 16 kilograms and a wingspan of 3 meters, which is taller than the elephants it lived with. If you look at the pictures of that, it looks so weird, but it's still cool. Really, really cool to have these animals. And look at these cute little ducks. Nice to talk a little bit about prehistory. Love these extinct animals. So now we're going a little bit back, or a little bit more further to our time. So we're going to Madagascar instead of Malta. Heading to Madagascar, we've got another mod by Narwhal. Narwhal really does love their paleo mods. See if you can find the male. The male should be around here somewhere. So this is the Edwards koala lemur. So there's 3 different species of koala lemur. So koala lemur is unfortunately known as the genus Megalaspis, which is from the family Megalaridae, which is a species of lemurs, which has 3 species that all lived in Madagascar, and were all quite big. They weren't the biggest of the lemurs. There's like Archaeoindris, which was like the size of a gorilla, but there was these guys were still quite big. So you can see they're quite different from any modern lemur. They had quite a different ecology. So their bodies were very squat, and they were built like that as a modern koala. So that's where they get the name koala lemur. They had long fingers and toes, adapted for climbing and grasping trees, and their legs were splayed for vertical climbing. Their hands and feet were also curved, and they did not actually have the usual ability to move on the ground like other lemurs did. So they're quite well adapted to living in arboreal habitats. Which is interesting. They also have long canine teeth and also very cow-like jaws, so very weird. And they were well adapted for eating lots of tough native vegetation. And based on the micro-wear patterns or the kind of scrapes that their food left on their teeth when they ate, these guys seem to have been folivores, so they used the leaf chopping foraging methods, so they would have been able to eat things like that. And they actually, they also show these traits that were actually closely related to the modern day sportive lemur, which is a really cool guy. So that's what they show they're related to. Their diet, however, may actually be more to influence for their development. And species had larger brains, but they had the brain size of a cat, so they weren't brain boxes, but clearly smart enough to survive until they went extinct. But they mostly would have lived on a folivorous diet of lots of leaves and trees and things like that, foliage. But yeah. In terms of size, these guys typically got about 140 kilograms. So some estimates have put them between 46 to 85 kilograms. That depends on the species. They still would have made them much larger than any extant lemur. And the skull is very interesting. They actually have a nasal region very similar to that of a rhino, which is interesting. And they have believed to be because they have enlarged upper lip for kind of grabbing leaves. They have the largest body size of... It had the largest body size of any lemur. And it's actually double the body mass of that. That's actually, I believe, to be Archaeoindris. So these guys are quite big. And compared to different species, the Edwards one was the biggest, so these guys were quite huge. And compared to the size diameter, these guys had large eyes, which means they would have been diurnal. And based on the mountain crawler, it seems the gestation period of these guys would have been about 198 days, but is likely longer. So it's really cool that we can figure out things like that about these guys. And while we talk about that, we'll have little cute little babies. Cute little baby lemur, very, very cute. So yeah, definitely one of the biggest. Archaeoindris was a really big lemur, about the size of a female gorilla, so these guys were quite huge. In terms of the island's topography, it was always changing, so these guys were kind of specialized. They liked the tree climbers, so they liked to live in big trees that supported their weight, because they were quite big. And some scratches and incursions were actually seen on the mandible and things like that, and it seems these guys, a lot of their fossils have been found in caves, and it's believed to be potentially that humans were cutting them up and... using them since when humans arrived on Madagascar. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But there's lots of well-preserved evidence of humans being around them when the extinction, and which is really cool. And there's actually some cultural references to these guys. So it's believed that Malagasy legends of the tree is an extinct animal that's believed to be Regulaspis, but thought to be more likely Paleoprognathus, Paleopropithecnexus, which is a type of other lemur, sloth lemur, that is like very much like a giant lemur orangutan, so which is quite interesting. So sadly, we're going to talk about their extinction. We'll look at the females when we talk about that. So these guys lived on Madagascar, isolated, all sorts with like pygmy hippos, elephant birds, giant tortoises, and many other different types of giant lemurs. Like as I mentioned, Archaeoindris, which was quite a huge lemur. These guys, I don't think they're actually considered the biggest lemur, but Archaeoindris was quite huge. They typically, humans arrived on Madagascar about 2,300 years ago. And in addition to all the species living on today, there are at least 17 species of now extinct giant lemur. There's also like elephant birds, big tortoises, things like that. Pygmy hippos too. So there was a lot of species living on there. And the landscape that these guys would have been living in was largely forested with quite dense vegetation. But sadly, because of... is this the male? No, it's the female. Anyway, we'll keep talking. There was looking at declines of spores and things like that. It seems that a lot of charcoal as well, as that humans were using slash burn methodology, so just slashing and burning a lot of forest to clear out a lot of land, potentially for farming or just to like clear land. So they would have converted a lot of that into grasslands, and grasslands would have worked well for these very arboreal lemurs. And they thought to have reached extinction finally in Madagascar about 500 to 600 years ago, which is a little bit sad. So a lot of the recent fossils show they probably went extinct at least minimum probably about 500 years ago. And another big thing as well that could have caused their extinction was extinction is overhunting. So we do have evidence of people cutting into them as well. But also, with all these factors, hunting, clearing for crops, hunting for bushmeat, all these factors could have very easily led to these extinctions, since they're large animals with slow breeding in specialized habitats, so like the tall forests. So it would have made them very much into extinction, as they were big, slow-moving, bulky creatures that are diurnal, active during the day. They also would have had small groups and high seasonal breeders, so that would have put them at a disadvantage, especially being so large, and having the low breeding rates would have really caused their extinction, which is really sad. But it's cool that we get to still have their fossils and know they actually lived with people up until recently. And who knows, with all this de-extinction stuff, very likely that giant lemurs and a lot of animals could be coming back to Madagascar. Though, sadly, Madagascar at the moment is really a conservation issue because of lots of not climate change, habitat destruction and illegal collection. So once we get those issues sorted, maybe we could think about bringing back some lemurs. So yeah, another great Narwhal mod. Really, really awesome. So I think this would be a great place to end the episode. Thank you, Leaf and Nick and Jen, Scott, and Great Cake Mods and Narwhal. You've all done wonderful jobs. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to hit the little bell icon to get notified of anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.